Hi there, I'm Diana, and this is Women Murderers Podcast. It's a series of stories about women who became murderers and what are the reasons they chose to do so. Share, subscribe, comment, and tell me what do you think about each story, and enjoy. Hey there. For today's episode, because this is my first episode of my podcast, Women Murderers, I wanted to choose a story. I said I want to start light. So I had in my plan to speak about some other different stories, but I said I will leave them for a later time, for another episode, because I still am researching and I'm still reading about those cases, which are like cases they will stuck on your head for a while and will make you talk about it to everyone. But coming back to this episode, I chose to speak about a woman that became famous in United Kingdom many years ago and who just got away with murder, even though like it's suspected she killed 17 people or more, for just a pragmatic reason. This case made me mad. Each case will make me feel a different emotion. I'm sure you will feel the same. This case specifically made me angry, mad, don't know, disgusted, disappointed of the reason, because every time I'm focused, what was the reason of this murder, of this case, why this person chose to do such a thing. And this story especially made me really like, why would you do such thing just for a very superficial and pragmatic motive? But let's dig in this story and bear with me till the end. Things are happening. Lots of things are happening. So let's begin. I was telling you this today's story is about Mary Ann Cotton. This is her name for the case after her one of her marriages, but her birth name was Mary Ann Robson. She was born in 1832 in a normal family for that time. Her father was working as a miner, and most of the families in that area where they were living were working in this field, mining field. So it was a common work job for that place and that time. Anyways, she had a good, normal childhood. Mary Ann was raised to be a normal child, a diligent student, as her former teachers said later on. When they heard about her case, they were saying she was a diligent student, very organized, nothing out of the ordinary. So everything was fine in that early age. But it seems everything started to change mentally for Mary Ann once her father died after an accident in the mine. It was a sudden death. After this accident, her father was just 30 years old, and at that time Mary Ann was like 8 years old. So she was very young. She needed her father the most. She had a very good relationship with this father. So somehow they put the case and her choices and her psychological health on this situation, the loss of her father at this early age. Anyways, after this, Mary Ann, she will live with her mother. Her mother will marry to another man who is working also as a miner. His name was George Scott. Marianne and this stepfather, George Scott, didn't have a great relationship. They didn't have anything to make them behave like a daughter and a father. She didn't have a great relationship. Let's keep it like this with this man. But she was bearing it. Once she turned 16 years old, she left the house to work as a nurse for a local man in the area. But after 3 years, she returned to her mother's house to train as a dressmaker. The years passed just like this, and when Marianne was 20 years old, she got pregnant and she married to a man called William Mowbray. This man was also working as a miner, so many times he had to move places for finding work, which kind of affected their relationship. So with him, they had many children. She said at a certain point she doesn't remember if she gave birth to either 4 or 5 children. But for sure, she had a girl named Margaret who died early after the birth. And Marianne was kind of affected because anyways, that time it was something common to have children dying in a very early age as babies, because there were like certain diseases spreading around, so it was something very usual for the time. But also they said this maybe impacted her emotionally and affected her to lose most of her children immediately after birth, even though their death was suspicious also. Anyways, she loses this baby girl, Margaret, and a few years after, her husband had to move for work, so he was most of the time away from home. And meanwhile, our lovely Mary Ann, she gets in a relationship and in an affair with another miner, the red-headed coal miner, Joseph Nattrass. Remember this name, Joseph Nattrass. So she gets in an affair with him and she will fall pregnant. But she will name the boy John Mowbray after her husband. Surprisingly, immediately after the boy was baptized, he will die from a gastric fever. This was happening in 1864. 1 year later, who do you think will die? Her husband, William Mowbray, will die some of typhus, but it's not sure. Anyways, after his death, Marianne receives insurance, which will kind of be lovely, and she will start to like this idea of getting insurances and money because they are related. Anyways, keep bearing with me. Then she has 2 daughters also. She has Margaret, who died soon after, and she has another daughter, Isabella. She sends this Isabella to stay with her mother, and she will go to work as a nurse. Also, she ends up the relationship with Nattrass because he was engaged and he had to go marry. So they finished just like that. So Marianne goes to work as a nurse. In this nursing house, she will find a patient, a man called George Ward. He was not very ill. He was not suffering of a deadly illness. But she gets in a relationship. They marry in August 1865. And immediately in 1866, he becomes very ill. Remember, he was not suffering of something special, he was just sick. But suddenly his health situation turns to be worse and worse, and he dies in 1866. Once again, what's happening? Marianne collects insurance money. Anyways, in December 1866, the same year when she loses this second husband, she will get to work as a housekeeper for a man called James Robinson. James Robinson lost his wife, she died, and he has 5 children. So he needed a female assistant, he needed someone to help him with the housekeeping, with taking care of the children. So she gets hired in this household. One day after she got hired, the baby of this man dies of a gastric fever. Just one day after she gets in this house, the baby who was healthy, nothing special, but dies of a gastric fever. Remember the symptom. Meanwhile, she was working in this house. She gets news from her mother. Her mother was 54 years old at that time in 1867. She gets news that her mother isn't feeling well. Remember, the mother of Marianne was taking care of her daughter Isabella and was the guardian of Isabella. So she goes to stay with her mother for a while to take care of her. But as I remember, her mother was like suffering of a hepatitis. So it was not something very hard. But after 9 days, Marianne arrives there, and after 9 days, her mother dies. Magically. So immediately after this, she has to return in Robinson's house to complete her work. But her father-in-law, remember George Scott, told her to take Isabella with her. He won't take care of the girl. Isabella, who was around 7 years old at the time. So she takes Isabella, she returns to James Robinson's house, and in April 1867, this was the month when 2 of the children of James Robinson, they die like 4 days apart. The 6-year-old James and the 8-year-old Elizabeth, they die 4 days apart. And after other 6 days in the same month, April 1867, her daughter Isabella dies also. That's why I said, like, bear with me again, once again. This is the time like makes you too mad. How is possible all these things? Anyways, remember, she gets in a relationship and she fell pregnant with this James. So they have to get married because she's pregnant. They get married. In November 1867, she gives birth to a girl. They name her Mary Isabella. Sadly, little Mary Isabella became ill and died in March following year. And in June 1869, she has a second child with James, a boy called George. Okay, everything was okay so far. Nobody dies, but James Robinson, her actual husband, discovers that Mary Ann is stealing money from his bank account, and also she's sending his children to sell belongings of the house to the pawn houses, the pawn offices. We don't know what she's doing with this money. He doesn't understand why she needs money, because she has everything she needs in the house. Why she needs all this amount of money? There were some suspicions that she is paying people to shut their mouths people who know about what is she doing, because there were some places selling arsenic, and she was buying at that time huge quantities. This substance was used in cleaning the houses, so many people put it maybe because she was cleaning the house and she was using a lot of this substance, led to people to die without her willing. But anyway, let's complete the story and we will come back to this motives, reasons. Remember, so Robinson finds out Marian is stealing, so he asks her to leave the house, and she is going to take George, the boy, with her. There is an event where she's asking a stranger to take care of George for a little while she's going to post a letter to the post office, and she will turn back immediately. She never came back after this. She just left the boy with a stranger. Anyways, the boy will return to his father and will stay in his custody. But anyways, she has to make herself a living after Robinson kicked her out, and she meets an old friend, Margaret Cotton. Her friend, this Margaret Cotton, has a brother, Frederick Cotton, whose wife recently died, and he was like very troubled, he's suffering, and he has 2 children. So Marian gets close to him, comforts him, becomes his close friend, and finds out that in the case of death of Margaret Cotton, the sister of Frederick, Frederick is going to receive insurance. So what do you think will happen? Just 4 weeks later, Marian moved with Cottons. And after these 4 weeks, Margaret, who was the one responsible to take care of the children of her brother, Margaret dies. 4 weeks later, or few weeks later, Marian got pregnant with Frederick, and they marry in 1870. Remember, she was not divorced by James Robinson. She was still married. So Frederick Cotton did not know that Marian was already married. Or maybe he knew, some people say. It's kind of a mystery if he knew or not. So remember, she got pregnant and she married Frederick Cotton. They moved to another place after they married. And where do you think they moved? They moved on a place, and they were living on the same street with Joseph Nattrass. Do you remember the red-headed miner, Joseph Nattrass, who was engaged and who was in a relationship with her while she was married to her first husband? That one. Joseph Nattrass, who was still married, and who will open the old flame between him and Mary Ann, and they will have another affair, which will lead Mary Ann to fall pregnant with him. Again, in September 1871, her husband, Frederick Cotton, becomes ill suddenly and dies 2 weeks later. Will he ever know that Mary Ann was in a bigamous marriage? We don't know. Anyways, Mary Ann will have now to take care of the 3 boys, her son with Frederick, and the 2 boys from his previous marriage. and she will receive a relief payment for the two boys, Frederick Jr. and Charles, as they were not her children. Anyways, Joseph Natras is going to move with them as he will leave his wife. And Marianne will convince him to change his will in her favor. So in case of Natras will die, she will inherit all his insurance and all his money. Anyways, around also this time, she will start to work again as a nurse for a man called Mr. Quick Manning. His name is kind of mysterious because he's going to change this name later. He was recovering from smallpox and she was nursing him. Anyways, she will get in a relationship with this man and she will get pregnant also because he was wealthy more than Natras. In the spring of 1872, Frederick Cotton and the new baby Robert Cotton and Joseph Natras all die within the space of 20 or so days. 3 people die in less than 20 days. So she's left to take care of the 7-year-old boy, Charles Cotton. He's the only one who survived, and by the way, she will get a good amount of money as an insurance even in case of this boy is going to die. Anyways, she's with this boy, Charles Cotton, taking care of him, and she's searching work, and there is a man who's coming to offer her a job, Thomas Rayleigh. Thomas Rayleigh, who is going to offer her work as a nurse for an old woman suffering from smallpox. She's going to accept, but she's putting a condition. She's asking this man, Thomas Rayleigh, if Charles could be accommodated in the workhouse so she could go and stay with this woman to work. And her response was that Charles was sick and would soon be dead. Quote, "I won't be troubled long, he'll go like the rest of the Cottons." End quote, she said. Anyways, 5 days later, Charles was dead. And this started to raise suspicion to Thomas Rayleigh. And even though Charles, he didn't seem to be sick, as she said, and they started to investigate his cause of death. They discovered later on in his stomach some arsenic, and then also while they're investigated, they investigated the bodies of Natras, Charles Cotton, Frederick Cotton Jr., and the baby Robert, and all their bodies contained arsenic. Now, the trial, she was arrested in 1872 for the murder of Charles Cotton. She was silent all over the investigation and she just gave some information. And she was pregnant, and this fact delayed her trial because she was pregnant with Quick Manning. Remember the man who was wealthy, and she was taking care of him while she was in a relationship with Natras. She gave birth in January 7, 1873, and she named the baby Edith Quick Manning Cotton. Mr. Quick Manning, who was embarrassed of this event, appears that changed his name and he fled away. The baby was taken into care and changed the name. Is the only survivor beside George Robinson of all her crimes. Marianne had no chance whatsoever of a fair trial, and they put she was tried only for the murders that had taken place, and she was found guilty on the murder of the boy Charles Cotton only. She was found guilty just for one murder, even though they suspected she killed all the rest of the people. There are 17 suspicions. On March 24, 1873, she was hanged, and it's said that it took very long for her to die. Like, she was strangled to death over several minutes, which is strange because in this case of strangulation, the person dies immediately or in a less time than what happened to her. Anyways, coming back to this situation, they're saying she didn't intend to kill all these people. It was just by accident, as I was telling you, because she was using too much arsenic to clean. They put it like it was just poisoning without intention. But I don't know. For me, this case just made me so mad, disgusted, depressed, and all this just for money, all this just to get insurances and your own children, because she just killed family, most of her children and her husbands and her lovers, and she made lots of kids. I know that time it was something very common to give birth to lots of children. What do you think about this case? Did you hear about this story before? What's the feeling it passes through you after hearing all this story? Just, for me, it makes me too angry, because all of these victims are children and her own children. Marianne will stay in the memory of people as a murderer. There are songs, there are videos, there are movies, there are documentaries about her life. Tell me, what do you think about this? See you next time for another episode about women murderers. Bye bye for now.